Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Classical Conscience. My guest today is someone very close to my heart, my violin teacher and mentor, Lewis Kaplan. I began studying with Mr. Kaplan when I was 10 years old, and he is the one primarily responsible for opening up my ears and my eyes to the vast and exciting world of music. His teachings have continued to inspire me even well beyond my years as a student. But he's also influenced so many other students across the globe as the founder of the Bowdoin International Music Festival, the Bach Virtuosi Festival. He's also taught for many years at the Salzburg Music Festival. And of course, he's been a professor at the Juilliard School and the Mannes School of Music for decades. Another way in which Mr. Kaplan uniquely contributes to the classical music community is by touring the world, delighting audiences with his insights into a piece written for solo violin by Bach called the Chaconne. I hope he'll go into a little bit of that today. All right, so I think it's time to go and say hello to Mr. Kaplan. All right, I'm here with Lewis Kaplan. Hi, Mr. Kaplan. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Sandy. It's great to see you again.
It's great to see you too, and I'm so honored that you're here on my little series. So let's dive right in. Starting with the basics, can you talk to us about how you got into music? Like, was your family musical, and why did you choose the violin, or did you even choose it?
I really don't remember exactly how. I just remember hearing it, what must have been on the radio. And I kept nagging my mother, I was 4 or 5, for a violin. And she spoke to her mother, my grandmother, about buying, in effect, a toy violin. And my grandmother said, why not buy him a real violin? And that's, maybe they should have stuck with the toy violin, I'm not sure. But anyway, that's how it began.
I'm glad, you got a real violin eventually.
Well, it's a long way from a toy violin to a Guadagnini, but
That's true. So you started with violin, and then can you tell us a little bit about how your life evolved and why you eventually became inspired to teach?
well, I certainly loved music, but I think that I was more inclined toward the depth of the art rather than just the technique. And this was the day and age of technique when I was a student. And so it was always a difficult time. And I think I was probably more interested in girls than I was in violin. And at the first opportunity to get away from home, which was after I had done the pre-college at Juilliard and 1 year of the college, it was during the Korean War. And guys were being drafted. And a lot of my friends were going to the special bands like the Marine Band in Washington and so on. There was an opening at West Point. So at 18, I did the audition and went to the band there. And after basic training and firing rifles and throwing hand grenades, I ended up in West Point, which was equally horrible. And so I have to tell you, I was tossed out of the West Point band. And that was the greatest thing that ever happened in my life, because they had just organized a symphony orchestra in Germany, which was designed really as a goodwill propaganda, if you want, gesture toward the German audiences. It was in 1953. And so I started practicing for the first time in about a year and was made the concertmaster. And then playing for German audiences in the 50s, which is primarily what we were doing, was completely eye-opening. I mean, it was before TV. It was the beginning of the German economic miracle. And so these audiences turned out to the free concerts, and you played for the right reason. You played because people wanted to hear music and you wanted to give them something. And so that was a major turning point in my life. And then it was back to Juilliard. And again, the feelings of wanting to be a musician was pretty hard to do really well. At least I found it that way at Juilliard. But then right after I graduated, I formed a chamber group called Aeolian Chamber Players. And it was the first group of mixed timbre, permanent group of its kind, a weird instrumentation with flute, clarinet, violin, and piano. Later we added a cello. And everybody said, there's no repertoire for it. That's fine, we're going to create a repertoire. And so some of the greatest pieces were written in the first few years. George Crumb wrote the 11 Echoes of Autumn, Ralph Shapey, Mario Davidovsky, the list goes on. And what is thrilling about that, first of all, the ideas, Sandy, of not playing a work that Heifetz has played and Joshua Bell and everybody else, and you think, well, how do I compare? Somewhere it's lurking there. No, there is no that. You're playing it for the first time. You are setting a standard. And I loved it. And I loved touring these works. Never made much money to speak of doing it, but it didn't matter. And playing with great musicians was eye-opening for me. And I began to really have a way to dig deeper into the music. And that's what I always really wanted to do. And then along the way, I began to find the fulfillment of what I wanted in Bach. My first recollections of playing Bach were as a student, really in the 20s, although I'm sure I had played Bach in the teens, but it meant nothing. And I was too busy with girls. So the playing it in the 20s, and I went to many teachers. I mean, not just violin teachers. I went to others, musicologists. What is Bach getting at? What's Bach about? And here at this great school, the Juilliard, I'm happy to say it's changed now. You can get many answers. I couldn't get an answer then. And the big turning point in Bach was a year or two after Adria and I were married. She gave me a birthday present, and it was the 3-volume set of the Philip Spita biography of Bach, which he wrote in the late 1870s. And it was the holy grail of biographies of Bach until more recent ones, which there are many that are quite wonderful. And I had heard a recording, which I have, of Joseph Szigeti playing it. And here was this awkward man. He was tall. He was sort of all elbows. But the playing was something so particularly special. There was something of this human trying to climb the mountain. And it was especially true in the Chaconne. And then back to Spita. Spita does an analysis, very much to the point, just 2 or 3 pages, of the Chaconne. And that was the entrance into not only what the Chaconne was about, but what is Bach about. And it has grown continuously since those years in the 60s. More recently, playing a lot with Baroque early music players. Did a lot stylistically, but it also helped to cement the idea, should Bach only be played on a harpsichord and on so-called original instruments? And I had a battle with that. And because I don't play in the old Baroque style, or old Baroque violin. But the answer is, of course, Bach can be marvelous on a piano. Not only can Bach be marvelous on a piano, he can be marvelous on a xylophone. If you are aware and know what makes Bach great is certainly his connection to God is a big part of it. Then it really doesn't matter what it is. I more recently, I don't know if I had told you about this or this evolved since you were no longer a student for several years, but I analogize Bach with Shakespeare in that Shakespeare created characters that are for all time. He captures the essence of the human race. And his characters, let's say the most famous Hamlet, he's highly intelligent, he's athletic, he's daring, but he's flawed. And it will lead to his death ultimately. Or Lady Macbeth driving her husband. Okay? And it's the interplay also of these characters with each other. And I feel that it's exactly the same as Bach, that even when Bach is writing a single line, it's multiple voices, and those voices are speaking to each other, just like any great playwright's voices, characters are speaking to each other. And I think that is a great part of the genius of what makes Bach unique. Another part, of course, whatever he did, when he wants to write a great tune, he writes a great tune. He can do anything he wants. But of course, harmony. And I came across just a few years ago a letter that Beethoven wrote to his publisher, one of his publishers. The publisher had written that he was going to publish 4 or 5 works of Bach. And Beethoven answered, great, in effect, Bach, the father of harmony, from Beethoven. And I think you just don't need to hear anything more about harmony than what Beethoven put in 4 or 5 words. And I think those are certainly the major stepping stones of the greatness of Bach. And I don't think any other composer that you can really say these same things about them. And that is why Bach is so unique. He did it all, and he just did it better than anyone else.
I really love that you compared Bach to Shakespeare, because growing up, I've always felt that people look upon Bach as this very rigid figure in history. You know, they don't quite see him as a human being that lived and breathed. I feel like so much focus has been on, you know, his skills in writing complex music, and it feels very abstract to the human condition. But here you are talking about Bach like he's Shakespeare, you know, coming up with characters, and those characters are flawed just like we are as humans, and they have, you know, emotions and experiences that are very much like ours or what we see in the world today. There's a lot of emotional depth in Bach that I think isn't discussed a lot, or at least not as much as the more technical aspects of his writing. And I remember when, you know, when I was a kid, I think I was maybe 11 or 12 years old when you introduced me to the Bach double concerto for, you know, 2 violins, and we played the parts together. And I just remember, you know, like the third movement, especially having so much banter between the instruments. And to me, that was really, really fun. I mean, forget about, you know, whether the guy was a genius or not. I just really enjoyed my time playing and, you know, communicating with you and the other instruments, and hearing how the music, you know, spoke within itself back and forth between the players. And then by complete contrast, you know, he also wrote such a like lyrical second movement, just those long, beautiful lines that make you think of, you know, a singer, and that's something, you know, that we might hear, but because
we're so bogged down in, like what we're supposed to learn, or even what we're supposed to know about Bach, that I think there's not a lot of not a lot of focus being put on how the music relates to us as human beings. And if you don't mind, could you talk a little bit more about the impressions that you get from Bach's music beyond just like what we know as musicians with harmony and melody, or all of the technical things we learn in school?
I want to pick up on two things that you said. You talked about the emotional aspect of Bach and that it seems too distant to the audience. And I agree with you. And I blame the performers that, like me in school, I had no idea what Bach was about. And so for a couple of hundred years, until fairly recently, most people didn't have any idea what Bach was about either. And you would hear, for example, from the G minor, Bach is a great composer. We have to make him great. Yes, it's up to us. Well, that's not the way it is. And not only that, I mean, you talk about him being human. I have felt just the last few years that he must have had a wonderful sense of humor. I feel that there's a tremendous amount of the music that he wrote that has a great deal of humor in it. And probably given the chaos in his life with such a large family and all the students that he was teaching in Leipzig and all the deadlines for cantatas every Sunday, he better have had a sense of humor, or he would have gone crazy. But along with this sense of humor on one aspect is that relationship to God. And whether he was writing sacred music or otherwise, I believe that he believed that all music was actually at the service of God. Not a totally, by any means, original philosophy. In a sense, it goes back to the ancient Greeks and to Pythagoras because of the perfection of the overtones, the ratio of 2 to 1, 3 to 2, and so on. Pythagoras, as a mathematician, thought that music was perfection and therefore godly. You know, I wanted to make an example in the chaconne. I like the three voices, maybe bass, tenor, alto, joined by a soprano. And that's pretty complex stuff, because not only the harmony, that bass line, yum, bum, bum, ba, yum, and added to that, it's a dance, the chaconne, with a 1, 2, the 1, 2. There's an awful lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
But you did it very well. You played it, I think you were probably 12 or 13, maybe younger, when you learned it.
Yes, 12. I think I was 12 when you first taught it to me.
And you know, that's one of the things that I derive great satisfaction from. Of course, I taught you, any student, what I know about the piece. And I try as much as possible to not give an opinion, but to say this is for sure what his bass line is, what his harmony is, what, and so on. And if I speculate, I'll tell the student. But you took certain things maybe that were similar to what I did, but you made it your own. And then a few years later, when you were at Harvard and you sent me the recording, you had very much made it your own. And I thought that was so satisfying, because I felt I not only taught you the work, but I left the door open for you to be you and not to just be a carbon copy of, what your teacher was telling you.
Oh, absolutely.
That's not great teaching to do that.
I mean, you did a very, very good job of not telling me what you think.
Yeah, but you knew what the piece was about.
I mean, this is actually, I remember when I first began studying with you, that was quite frustrating because you wouldn't give me, you wouldn't tell me how to finger certain passages in the left hand. You wouldn't tell me what bowings to use. And when I was first starting
That's
out.
not completely true. I would told you to go to the score.
Well, yes, but let me get there first.
Oh, okay, go on. Go on.
Because you wouldn't just give me those things outright. You would tell me that I had to figure it out for myself. I had to listen to the music and think about what the music was trying to tell me, and then decide, which way I fingered a certain passage in my left hand would contribute to the sound that I wanted to create to serve the purpose of the music. And the same was for the right hand bowings. And I'm extremely grateful for your manner of teaching now, because like you said, you've left the door open, and it's basically given me the foundation for everything that I do, in my career, my musical life. And it allowed my imagination to grow. But your style of teaching is very atypical for a violin professor. I mean, I remember my lessons were and your master classes, they were sometimes even more about theater and drama or fine art or literature than it was about the actual piece that I was playing that day. And and this is not something that I realized later on that people encounter in their music lessons when they're learning an instrument. And I was hoping that today you could maybe enlighten our listeners about why it's so important, why you think it's so important to engage your students that way. Because I remember you kicked me out of a lesson once to go to the library and check out a score because I didn't know what the orchestra was supposed to be playing under my solo part. And you were very disappointed, so you said you go to the library and get the score.
It just seems to me so logical. And that this is the way it used to be done. I mean, my teacher, Galamian, and I loved him and I love him to this day, but he insisted that all of the students take his bowings and his fingerings. So you think about it. You give a student the fingerings and bowings, they copy the fingerings, copy the bowings. They have to be thinking, this is the right way. So you then fit whatever musical ideas you may or may not have into the given fingerings and bowings. Well, that's obviously wrong. What you want to do is to have anybody thinking, what do I want to be? What is the music saying? And then you make the fingerings and bowings according to that. You don't fit what you want the music to say into somebody else's fingerings and bowings. It just seems so terribly logical to me. But I do feel, as you indicated, it goes well beyond just teaching the violin. I think that by thinking of who you want to be and arranging, in this case, fingerings and bowings and a lot more stuff, it gives you the confidence to know who you are in life, no matter what you do. And I've had several students have gone on to be lawyers and doctors, and I've loved teaching them. And many of them play very, very, very well. But I think there's more to it than just saying how far will a student go. And maybe it is gratifying to know that you made a student's life better. You made a person's life better. That, I mean, how many people can really do that? So I think that as a teacher, maybe that is the most important and the most rewarding part of teaching, what you impart and what you give to people.
I really, I think it's important that you mentioned how when a teacher just gives outright a fingering and a bowing and tells the student, this is how you're supposed to play it, and that they then learn to believe that there's just one correct way to do something. I think it's very important you mentioned that, because on a broader level, I feel that the general public's concept of classical music is also like that. Like you have to have a certain kind of education. You have to be a musician to really appreciate it, or at least have studied music to some extent. And you have to be of maybe even a certain social class or a certain age. There are just so many walls, I think, that are built up around our community. And I think that's harmful, not just to us as musicians, but to all of the people who could potentially be enjoying all of this great music. Because just like you said, when a student tries to figure out on their own, like, what does this music mean on its own, and what does it mean to me, and what can I do with it, and how am I going to project it? It's like learning about yourself as a human being, and what place you have in life, in the world, among your friends, family. And I think it's the same with classical music. There's no one correct way to listen to something or to appreciate it. I mean, sure, there are certain limits. You can't listen to a piece of happy music and then say, oh God, this is so depressing. But there's so many dimensions, there's so many ways of hearing a piece and experiencing it and playing it, and there can be multiple correct ways to deliver music to an audience.
My dear friend who died a couple of years ago and neighbor, Peter Schaffer, the playwright, who wrote Amadeus, many other great plays. He was English, and we were having dinner in my apartment, and just by chance, I don't think it ever entered his mind that he would make a game-changing remark to me. But he said that all of Shakespeare's plays are either about love or murder or both. And that got me to thinking. And I now think of it as virtually all art, whether it's painting or dance or music or poetry, most of it is really about some form of love. And I think that if one starts there, that whether it's the love of a Tchaikovsky, a love of God with Bach, a love of the human race, perhaps, of Beethoven, some form of love. And that immediately takes it out of the realm of just more notes to read. Start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these composers, they weren't writing all of this great music because sitting there thinking like, okay, I'm going to be the best at this and it's going to be like technically perfect. That, they were writing because of things that they were feeling.
And not only that, one, of course, with an instrumentalist, say you have recordings, but Bach, when he died in 1750, was essentially forgotten, other than probably keyboard pieces, which Mozart and Beethoven did know. But it took, was it 1829, when Mendelssohn revived the St. Matthew Passion. So for 129 years, Bach lay dormant, just as a keyboard exercise person. And I think if there's anything that all of us want in life, is hope. And that knowing that to be true gives one hope that you don't know where it will go and how it will go. And the will, the strength to somehow keep going as you were doing after an idea, and your ideas change and grow. And that is, it's so admirable, and all the great things that you continue to do and always did since you were very young. It's really an extraordinary thing.
Well, I owe so much to you. I mean, you've been an inspiration for practically my whole life, since I met you. I think I was 9, almost 10 when I first met you. And I will never, ever forget that first meeting when, I was in your apartment and I played the Bach A minor concerto, or at least the first movement. I played it once through. It was just me on my tiny violin, and you didn't say much. You just said, okay, let's do it again, and this time I'll play with you. And I didn't know what you meant by I will play with you, because to me, like, okay, this is a violin concerto. There's supposed to be an orchestra behind me, so what is this man going to do? And you got out this little pocket score with like all the orchestral parts and put it on the stand in front of you, and you looked up at me and said, okay, are you ready? And so then I started playing again. And the next thing I know, like, I'm playing my solo part, but I'm hearing the entire orchestra behind me. Well, you were in front of me, but to me, it felt like it was all behind me. And I was so impressed by that. That was the moment I decided, I was like, this is the teacher that I want to have, because like he can play the whole orchestra on his violin.
But what you don't probably remember, but I do, that first lesson, you weren't just playing the Bach A minor, you were dancing. You were just hopping around while you played the violin. And I thought that was very unique, very outstanding. This person has really something to say, something unusual. That's what caught me, and I remember it very clearly.
Wow. Well, that's just, I don't remember that specifically, although I don't doubt you one bit, because, movement has always been just a personal aspect of my musical expression. And as you know, I've gone through a lot of tumultuous periods because of it. But I think that's also really important, that when a musician is evolving, that they find their best way of expressing themselves, because I think that's the only way that one can truly, bring music to an audience, is that if you're true to yourself, and by being true to yourself, you're also being truer to the music, then the intent becomes pure, in the sense that your mind isn't bogged down by like what everybody thinks, whether you're going to make a mistake. The idea is just that you're sharing music.
Quite a while ago, I heard Arthur Rubinstein being interviewed by Dick Cavett on a late night show. And I knew that Rubinstein got very nervous. My friends in the Guarneri Quartet had recorded and played concerts with him. And they told me how nervous he was. It was just very scary. And he mentioned this in the course of the interview and said that he would always go out on stage and play for someone. He never knew who, but always for someone. Well, that part I believe, but Rubinstein was a great raconteur. Who knows about the next part? But he said in this one particular concert he played, and it was for an elderly lady. And after the concert, there were the autograph seekers and the friends and so on. And finally, everyone was gone, and he turned, and there in the corner was this elderly lady who said, "You played for me tonight, didn't you?" Beautiful.
It is beautiful. And I mean, I think some people might probably be skeptical about a story like that, but I think it rings true in some sense, because I know, I mean, for the most part, I don't always choose like one specific person to play to when I'm performing, but there have been occasions where, especially when you're repeating the same concert over and over, the same music for different audiences, there needs to be a way to get around the automated mindset. And I find that one way to combat that is to, like you said, play for a single person. So I have occasionally thought, okay, I'm going to walk out there and I'm going to play for, choose just one person that I don't know to play for. And
Did you find that it really made a difference?
Well, I don't know if it made a difference for that particular person.
No, made a difference to you.
To me, yes, because there's it feels different than just playing generally for an audience and sharing music with a massive group of people. I do love that, and I think that's why I enjoy performing so much. But when you pick a specific person, it becomes a bit more intimate, even if it's only in your head. And I can't say that that particular person on whatever day I chose to do it came up to me and said, like, you played for me. But I have on occasion had someone come up to me at a meet and greet after a concert and tell me, I feel like you played for me. And of course, like, I can't see that person in the audience because they're too far away and I've got lights shining on my face and in my eyes. But I think it makes a difference when in your mind you get up on stage and you have this intent of just bringing that level of intimacy to another person's experience.
Well, two things. That goes back to what we were saying. If you're playing for a person, that's love, even if you've never met the person or whatever. Okay, we're playing for somebody who died, but it is love, and that is what art is really about. The other part, it's interesting that this person said to you, it felt like you played for me today. I never heard Fritz Kreisler live. And I asked Galamian, what was it like to hear Fritz Kreisler live? And he thought for a moment and he said, it was like he played only for you, even if it was Carnegie Hall. And a year or so later, another one of the violin faculty at Juilliard, Joseph Fuchs, a wonderful violinist, a wonderful musician. And I said, Joe, what was it like to hear Fritz Kreisler live? He thought for a second, he said, it was like he played just for you.
That's amazing.
And I'm sure they did not rehearse it. I'm sure of it. But that is such a remarkable, great thing to do that.
Come join us again on Wednesday, December 30th for part 2.